Praise the Lord. According to 1 Year Bible Reading Plan D98, we have 2 Kings chapter 7 to 10. 2 Kings chapter 7. Elisha answered, "Listen to what the Lord says. By this time tomorrow you will be able to buy in Samaria 10 pounds of the best wheat or 20 pounds of barley for 1 piece of silver." The personal attendant of the king said to Elisha, "That can't happen, not even if the Lord himself were to send grain at once." "You will see it happen, but you won't get to eat any of the food," Elisha replied. 4 men who were suffering from a dreaded skin disease were outside the gates of Samaria, and they said to each other, "Why should we wait here until we die? It's no use going into the city, because we would starve to death in there. But if we stay here, we'll die also. So let's go to the Syrian camp. The worst they can do is kill us, but maybe they will spare our lives." So as it began to get dark, they went to the Syrian camp. But when they reached it, no one was there. The Lord had made the Syrians hear what sounded like the advance of a large army with horses and chariots, and the Syrians thought that the king of Israel had hired Hittite and Egyptian kings and their armies to attack them. So that evening the Syrians had fled for their lives, abandoning their tents, horses, and donkeys, and leaving the camp just as it was. When the 4 men reached the edge of the camp, they went into a tent, ate and drank what was there, grabbed the silver, gold, and clothing they found, and went off and hid them. Then they returned, entered another tent, and did the same thing. But then they said to each other, "We shouldn't be doing this. We have good news and we shouldn't keep it to ourselves. If we wait until morning to tell it, we are sure to be punished. Let's go right now and tell the king's officers." So they left the Syrian camp, went back to Samaria, and called out to the guards at the gates, "We went to the Syrian camp and didn't see or hear anybody. The horses and donkeys have not been untied, and the tents are just as the Syrians left them." The guards announced the news, and it was reported in the palace. It was still night, but the king got out of bed and said to his officials, "I'll tell you what the Syrians are planning. They know about the famine here, so they have left their camp to go and hide in the countryside. They think that we will leave the city to find food, and then they will take us alive and capture the city." One of his officials said, "The people here in the city are doomed anyway, like those that have already died. So let's send some men with 5 of the horses that are left, so that we can find out what has happened." They chose some men, and the king sent them in 2 chariots with instructions to go and find out what had happened to the Syrian army. The men went as far as the Jordan, and all along the road they saw the clothes and equipment that the Syrians had abandoned as they fled. When they returned and reported to the king, the people of Samaria rushed out and located the Syrian camp. And as the Lord had said, 10 pounds of the best wheat or 20 pounds of barley was sold for 1 piece of silver. It so happened that the king of Israel had put the city gate under the command of the officer who was his personal attendant. The officer was trampled to death there by the people and died, as Elisha had predicted when the king went to see him. Elisha had told the king that by that time, the following day, 10 pounds of best wheat or 20 pounds of barley would be sold in Samaria for 1 piece of silver. To which the officer had answered, "That can't happen, not even if the Lord himself were to send grain at once." And Elisha had replied, "You will see it, but you won't get to eat any of the food." And that is just what happened to him. He died, trampled to death by the people at the city gate. 2 Kings chapter 8. Now Elisha had told the woman who lived in Shunem, whose son he had brought back to life, that the Lord was sending a famine on the land, which would last for 7 years, and that she should leave with her family and go and live somewhere else. She had followed his instructions and had gone with her family to live in Philistia for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she returned to Israel and went to the king to ask that her house and her land be restored to her. She found the king talking with Gehazi, Elisha's servant. The king wanted to know about Elisha's miracles. When Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had brought a dead person back to life, the woman made her appeal to the king. Gehazi said to him, "Your Majesty, here is the woman and here is her son, whom Elisha brought back to life." In answer to the king's question, she confirmed Gehazi's story, and so the king called an official and told him to give back to her everything that was hers, including all the value of all the crops that her fields had produced during the 7 years she had been away. Elisha went to Damascus at a time when King Ben-Hadad of Syria was sick. When the king was told that Elisha was there, he had said to Hazael, one of his officials, "Take a gift to the prophet and ask him to consult the Lord to find out whether or not I am going to get well." So Hazael loaded 40 camels with all kinds of the finest products of Damascus and went to Elisha. When Hazael met him, he said, "Your servant King Ben-Hadad has sent me to ask you whether or not he will recover from his sickness." Elisha answered, "The Lord has revealed to me that he will die, but go to him and tell him that he will recover." Then Elisha stared at him with a horrified look on his face until Hazael became ill at ease. Suddenly Elisha burst into tears. "Why are you crying, sir?" Hazael asked. "Because I know the horrible things you will do against the people of Israel," Elisha answered. "You will set their fortresses on fire, slaughter the finest young men, batter their children to death, and rip open their pregnant women." "How could I ever be that powerful?" Hazael asked. "I am a nobody. The Lord had shown me that you will be king of Syria," Elisha replied. Hazael went back to Ben-Hadad, who asked him, "What did Elisha say?" "He told me that you will certainly get well," Hazael answered. But on the following day Hazael took a blanket, soaked it in water, and smothered the king, and Hazael succeeded Ben-Hadad as king of Syria. In the 5th year of the reign of Joram son of Ahab as king of Israel, Jehoram son of Jehoshaphat became king of Judah at the age of 32, and he ruled in Jerusalem for 8 years. His wife was Ahab's daughter, and like the family of Ahab, he followed the evil ways of the kings of Israel. He sinned against the Lord, but the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah, because he had promised his servant David that his descendants would always continue to rule. During Jehoram's reign, Edom revolted against Judah and became an independent kingdom. So Jehoram set out with all his chariots to Zar, where the Edomite army surrounded them. During the night, he and his chariot commanders managed to break out and escape, and his soldiers scattered to their homes. Edom has been independent of Judah ever since. During the same period, the city of Libnah also revolted. Everything else that Jehoram did is recorded in the history of kings of Judah. Jehoram died and was buried in the royal tombs in David's city, and his son Ahaziah succeeded him as king. In the 12th year of the reign of Joram son of Ahab as king of Israel, Ahaziah son of Jehoram became king of Judah at the age of 22, and he ruled in Jerusalem for 1 year. His mother was Athaliah, the daughter of King Ahab and granddaughter of King Omri of Israel. Since Ahaziah was related to King Ahab by marriage, he sinned against the Lord, just as Ahab's family did. King Ahaziah joined King Joram of Israel in a war against King Hazael of Syria. The armies clashed at Ramoth in Gilead, and Joram was wounded in battle. He returned to the city of Jezreel to recover from his wounds, and Ahaziah went there to visit him. 2 Kings chapter 9. Meanwhile, the prophet Elisha called one of the young prophets and said to him, "Get ready and go to Ramoth in Gilead. Take this jar of olive oil with you. And when you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, and grandson of Nimshi. Take him to a private room away from his companions. Pour this olive oil on his head and say, 'The Lord proclaims that he anoints you king of Israel.' Then leave there as fast as you can." So the young prophet went to Ramoth, where he found the army officers in conference. He said, "Sir, I have a message for you." Jehu asked, "Which one of us are you speaking to?" "To you, sir," he replied. Then the two of them went indoors, and the young prophet poured the olive oil on Jehu's head, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, proclaims, 'I anoint you king of my people Israel.' You are to kill your young master, the king, that son of Ahab, so that I may punish Jezebel for murdering my prophets and my other servants. All of Ahab's family and descendants are to die. I will get rid of every male in his family, young and old alike. I will treat his family as I did the families of King Jeroboam of Israel and of King Baasha of Israel. Jezebel will not be buried. Her body will be eaten by dogs in the territory of Jezreel." After saying this, the young prophet left the room and fled. Jehu went back to his fellow officers, who asked him, "Is everything all right? What did that crazy fellow want with you?" "You know what he wanted," Jehu answered. "No, we don't," they replied. "Tell us what he said." "He told me that the Lord proclaims, 'I anoint you king of Israel.'" At once Jehu's fellow officers spread their cloaks at the top of the steps for Jehu to stand on, blew trumpets, and shouted, "Jehu is king." Then Jehu plotted against King Joram, who was in Jezreel, where he had gone to recover from the wounds which he had received in the battle of Ramoth against King Hazael of Syria. So Jehu said to his fellow officers, "If you are with me, make sure that no one slips out of Ramoth to go and warn the people in Jezreel." Then he got into his chariot and set off for Jezreel. Joram had still not recovered, and King Ahaziah of Judah was there visiting him. A guard on duty in the watchtower at Jezreel saw Jehu and his men approaching. "I see some men riding up," he called out. Joram replied, "Send a rider to find out if they are friends or enemies." The messenger rode out to Jehu and said to him, "The king wants to know if you come as a friend." "That's none of your business," Jehu answered. "Fall in behind me." The guard on the watchtower reported that the messenger had reached the group but was not returning. Another messenger was sent out, who asked Jehu the same question. Again Jehu answered, "That's none of your business. Fall in behind me." Once more the guard reported that the messenger had reached the group but was not returning, and he added, "The leader of the group is driving his chariot like a madman, just like Jehu." "Get my chariot ready," King Joram ordered. It was done, and he and King Ahaziah rode out, each in his own chariot, to meet Jehu. They met him at the field which had belonged to Naboth. "Are you coming in peace?" Joram asked him. "How can there be peace?" Jehu answered, "when we still have all the witchcrafts and idolatry that your mother Jezebel started." "It's treason, Ahaziah!" Joram cried out, as he turned his chariot around and fled. Jehu drew his bow, and with all his strength shot an arrow that struck Joram in the back and pierced his heart. Joram fell dead in his chariot, and Jehu said to his aide Bidkar, "Get his body and throw it in the field that belonged to Naboth. Remember that when you and I were riding together behind King Joram's father Ahab, the Lord spoke these words against Ahab. 'I saw the murder of Naboth and his sons yesterday, and I promise that I will punish you here in this same field.' So take Joram's body, Jehu ordered his aide, and throw it in the field that belonged to Naboth, so as to fulfill the Lord's promise. King Ahaziah saw what happened, so he fled in his chariot toward the town of Beth Hagan, pursued by Jehu. Kill him too, Jehu ordered his men, and they wounded him as he drove his chariot on the road up to Gur, near the town of Ibleam. But he managed to keep on going until he reached the city of Megiddo, where he died. His officials took his body back to Jerusalem in a chariot and buried him in the royal tombs in David's city. Ahaziah had become king of Judah in the 11th year that Joram, son of Ahab, was king of Israel. Jehu arrived in Jezreel. Jezebel, having heard what had happened, put on eyeshadow, arranged her hair, and stood looking down at the street from a window in the palace. As Jehu came through the gate, she called out, "You Zimri, you assassin, why are you here?" Jehu looked up and shouted, "Who is on my side?" 2 or 3 palace officials looked down at him from a window. Jehu said to them, "Throw her down." They threw her down, and her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses. Jehu drove his horses and chariot over her body, entered the palace, and had a meal. Only then did he say, "Take that cursed woman and bury her. After all, she is a king's daughter." But the men who went out to bury her found nothing except her skull and the bones of her hands and feet. When they reported this to Jehu, he said, "This is what the Lord said would happen when he spoke to his servant Elijah. Dogs will eat Jezebel's body in the territory of Jezreel. Her remains will be scattered there like dung, so that no one will be identify them." 2 Kings chapter 10. There were 70 descendants of King Ahab living in the city of Samaria. Jehu wrote a letter and sent copies to the rulers of the city, to the leading citizens, and to the guardians of Ahab's descendants. The letter read, "You are in charge of the king's descendants, and you have at your disposal chariots, horses, weapons, and fortified cities. So then, as you soon receive this letter, you are to choose the best qualified of the king's descendants, make him king, and fight to defend him." The rulers of Samaria were terrified. "How can we oppose Jehu?" they said, "when neither King Joram nor King Ahaziah could." So the officer in charge of the palace and the official in charge of the city, together with the leading citizens and the guardians, sent this message to Jehu: "We are your servants, and we are ready to do anything you say, but we will not make anyone king. Do whatever you think best." Jehu wrote them another letter: "If you are with me and are ready to follow my orders, bring the heads of King Ahab's descendants to me at Jezreel by this time tomorrow." The 70 descendants of King Ahab were under the care of leading citizens of Samaria, who were bringing them up. When Jehu's letter was received, the leaders of Samaria killed all 70 of Ahab's descendants, put their heads in baskets, and sent them to Jehu at Jezreel. When Jehu was told that the heads of Ahab's descendants had been brought, he ordered them to be piled up in 2 heaps at the city gate and to be left there until the following morning. In the morning he went out to the gate and said to the people who were there, "I was the one who plotted against King Joram and killed him. You are not responsible for that. But who killed all these?" This proves that everything that the Lord said about the descendants of Ahab will come true. The Lord has done what he promised to his prophet Elijah. Then Jehu put to death all the other relatives of Ahab's living in Jezreel, and all his officers, close friends, and priests. Not one of them was left alive. Jehu left Jezreel to go to Samaria. On the way, at a palace called Shepherd's Camp, he met some relatives of the late King Ahaziah of Judah and asked them, "Who are you?" Ahaziah's relatives, they answered, "We are going to Jezreel to pay our respects to the children of Queen Jezebel and to the rest of the royal family." Jehu ordered his men, "Take them alive." They seized them, and he put them to death near a pit there. There were 42 people in all, and not one of them was left alive. Jehu started out again, and on his way he was met by Jonadab, son of Rechab. Jehu greeted him and said, "You and I think alike. Will you support me?" "I will," Jonadab answered. "Give me your hand then," Jehu replied. They clasped hands, and Jehu helped him up into the chariot, saying, "Come with me and see for yourself how I devoted am to the Lord." And they rode on together to Samaria. When they arrived there, Jehu killed all of Ahab's relatives, not sparing even one. This is what the Lord had told Elijah would happen. Jehu called the people of Samaria together and said, "King Ahab served the god Baal a little, but I will serve him much more. Call together all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers, and all his priests. No one is excused. I am going to offer a great sacrifice to Baal, and whoever is not present will be put to death." This was a trick on the part of Jehu by which he meant to kill all the worshippers of Baal. Then Jehu ordered, "Proclaim a day of worship in honor of Baal." The proclamation was made, and Jehu sent word throughout all the land of Israel. All who worshipped Baal came, not one of them failed to come. They all went into the temple of Baal, filling it from one end to the other. Then Jehu ordered the priest in charge of the sacred robes to bring the robes out and give them to the worshippers. After that, Jehu himself went into the temple with Jonadab son of Rechab, and said to the people there, "Make sure that only worshippers of Baal are present, and that no worshipper of the Lord has come in." Then he and Jonadab went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings to Baal. He had stationed 80 men outside the temple and had instructed them, "You are to kill all these people. Anyone who lets one of them escape will pay for it with his life." As soon as Jehu had presented the offerings, he said to the guards and officers, "Go and kill them all. Don't let anyone escape." They went in with drawn swords, killed them all, and dragged the bodies outside. Then they went on into the inner sanctuary of the temple, brought out the sacred pillar that was there, and burnt it. So they destroyed the sacred pillar in the temple, and turned the temple into a labyrinth, which it still is today. That was how Jehu wiped out the worship of Baal in Israel. But he imitated the sin of King Jeroboam, who led Israel into sin of worshipping the gold bull calves he set up in Bethel and in Dan. The Lord said to Jehu, "You have done to Ahab's descendants everything I wanted you to do so I promise you that your descendants down to the fourth generation will be king of Israel." But Jehu did not obey with all his heart the law of the Lord, the God of Israel. Instead, he followed the example of Jeroboam, who led Israel into sin. At that time, the Lord began to reduce the size of Israel's territory. King Hazael of Syria conquered all the Israelite territory east of the Jordan, as far south as the town of Aroer on the Arnon River. This included the territories of Gilead and Bashan, where the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and East Manasseh lived. Everything else that Jehu did, including his brave deeds, is recorded in the history of the kings of Israel. He died and was buried in Samaria, and his son Jehoahaz succeeded him as king. Jehu had ruled in Samaria as king of Israel for 28 years. May the Lord bless us abundantly. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.